Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is the actor Lucas Neff, whom you may remember as Jimmy Chance on 4 seasons of the Fox comedy Raising Hope. This year, he co-starred in the movies I Love You Both and Fear Incorporated, and he's also in the new TV series Downward Dog, coming to ABC in 2017. Lucas picked All the President's Men, which, come on. Alan J. Pakula's dramatization of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein's reporting on the Watergate cover-up, an investigation that would bring down sitting President Richard M. Nixon, may not have the immediacy it did when it opened just a few years after the events it depicts, but it still functions as a gripping procedural, a nail-biting thriller, and a terrific newspaper picture. It's the mother of all 1970s conspiracy movies because this one actually happened. Nominated for 8 Oscars in a banner year for American cinema, it won 4, including Best Supporting Actor for Jason Robards and Best Adapted Screenplay for William Goldman. It's 40 years old, but it hasn't aged a day. And speaking of things not feeling old, I should note that Lucas recorded this episode 5 months ago when he was in town for the Inside Out premiere of I Love You Both, but we might as well have taped it this past weekend. You'll see. This is Someone Else's Movie.
It's one of the most relevant political movies, unfortunately, for our time. Do you know what I mean? It's about unchecked power. It's about freedom of the press. It's about journalistic integrity. It's about, scrupulous editorial oversight. It's about authoritative reportage and investigation. And it's about, how necessary the Fifth Estate is. And to that, it's it's the kind of movie that studios outside, Spotlight came out very recently, and you'd say, Spotlight's the natural sort of progeny of All the President's Men. There's a clear relation, it's a journalism movie, uncovering the big story. But I think that it's the kind of movie that doesn't really get made anymore, and it's exactly the kind of movie that needs to get made more frequently.
Yeah.
Plus, it's just fucking so good. The acting is fucking amazing. The cinematography, the writing, every aspect of it is pinpoint and awesome.
Yeah, it is one of the films that, it's 40 years old now, which is just stunning to me. It literally is a movie about history, but it's also a movie about an age that doesn't exist anymore, even though all the locations are still there. Everything is, Washington is still Washington. I don't think there's really been that much change in the political world, but the world of Woodward and Bernstein
has completely...
Yeah, it's been lost in the noise of a million different outlets.
It's been subsumed.
Yeah. This wave of... the internet killed newspapers, but the internet also killed the idea of objectivity or the illusion of investigation, because now everyone has 10 facts that they can cite from sources that aren't real, but that are real to them. And, this was a time when the reporting was authoritative because there was no other source, right?
It had to be.
Yeah.
Right? There was a mandate that you had to be able to trust the newspapers. Their word was everything, right? That was why, when in those scenes where the White House comes out and basically calls them liars, it's a huge deal for the editors, to sort of stand by their writers.
Yeah,
and no, we're gonna stand by the story and stand by what we say. And even though and that's why there's all this tension about whether or not they have the facts and if they have enough facts to really run the story.
Yeah, which again, that doesn't happen anymore.
I was just trolling CNN the other day because you just run through it and it's literally just. They're just a conduit for spokespeople. Hillary will kill the country. Trump is a gigantic pterodactyl.
Yes.
It's just but that's not a news story. That's not news. There's nothing of insight to the American public there. It's just spin, and it's amazing to see how our relationship to the news has changed.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of stunning to see. I think Saturday Night Live was doing the joke, it must have been 15 years ago now, where the CNN chyron would immediately display the thing that the person just said. And it's only this week someone actually used the chyron to refute Trump. The spokesman said, Trump says this, and in the Chiron it says, spokesman, Trump said this, bracket, he didn't, bracket. Or he did. Just to call them out on lies.
But not to their face.
No, exactly, because they won't go on. They won't be part of this.
Yeah, it's just like, it's this...
Even Nixon was giving press briefings.
Yeah.
That's what's so amazing about All the President's Men. You have surrogates being deployed to destroy people looking to find the cover-up, but Nixon himself still managed to be, at least in his own zone, in his own bubble of support, he was still a respected politician. He was...
I think the expectation of the level of discourse and the level of facility with discourse that any public figure would bring into the fold was much higher.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You were expected to be able to contain within yourself the highest form of polemic at any given moment. Like you were supposed to be able to speak extemporaneously to anything.
Yeah.
You're the president. There's a certain level of intellectual sort of like probity that we just kind of like took for guarantee.
Yeah.
And that's just not the case anymore. And it's not even the fact that it's it's overtly not the case, but that fact I feel like isn't. I feel like it should be more properly adjudicated by the the press is like where do you actually stand? What are the issues? Like let's talk what are the actual points of foreign policy as opposed to Trump thinks Mexico should build a wall. Well, can we actually get into our relationship to Mexico, our relationship to Latin America, how infrastructure works on borders, why this is the most preposterous, lazy, racist sort of kind of populism, that you can mount, and it's just journalism sucks now. It sucks. They don't have money. That's a huge part of it. Yeah. They don't pay reporters.
Yeah,
they don't take their time.
We don't have the bureaus that we used to have. I mean, I wrote for the Toronto Star as a freelancer in the 80s and 90s, and you could just feel the power of this thing. Investigative teams would actually be able to reach the people they needed to reach, get results. There was this phrase that they threw around a lot, Star gets action, but they actually could. People were, if not afraid of the paper finding out what they were doing, they certainly were intimidated by the possibility. People would think twice because they'd probably get caught. Now, you can lie and you can slander and you can do whatever you want because no one is going to call you on it. And if they do, your followers won't listen. You can guarantee that your coverage is going to be preferential.
And this is all related to the Fox News case in the early thousands, where they won the right, through an enormous perversion of the First Amendment and the use of Clinton wrote a bill, and I forget the name of it, but it protected news stations from having to provide fact. That before there was a specific,
there was the fairness doctrine
piece of legislation,
in the 80s that Reagan killed.
Yeah,
it sort of paved the way for Fox.
And you have me at a lot there that I'm not as up to snuff on that as I should be, but I know that Clinton wrote a bill in his tenure that basically allowed Fox to, because there used to be certain quota of there has to be a reflection of both sides to any issue, both sides have to be presented and a certain amount of facts have to be present.
That was the fairness doctrine.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
That was literally it, which Reagan got rid of in, I want to say 86.
Okay.
And that sort of paved the way for Fox to rise 10 years later, and because they were unencumbered by the law.
Yeah, they could just say whatever they want and say it's news.
And everything becomes classified as opinion. I think that was the thing that Clinton had done, where there was more of a separation there.
Yeah. I think you have it right. But, and since then, we've been trained that you do not ever have to capitulate to reality.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It doesn't matter how checked your facts are. You can prove someone through and through as a liar, and they can just say, I'm not a liar, and then that's the story that'll run.
Yeah.
And it's treated the same way as an objective truth, which is kind of insane. And the craziest thing to me about, to get back to the movie really briefly.
No, please.
One of the craziest things is the timeline from the events that actually occurred to the movie itself.
Mm-hmm. It was made
no time at all. It's 1976 is when it came out.
And the Watergate crisis was 72, really.
Yeah. So 4 years. Can you imagine a major studio movie that intensely critical and journalistic coming out about a president 4 years later after an event.
Well, and the book took a while to be written, too.
Yeah, and there's a book.
Published until, I want to say, late 73, the book came out.
Mm-hmm.
But Robert Redford was sort of uniquely positioned, I guess. He'd already defined himself as an activist. He'd already been outspoken politically. He'd made The Candidate, which sort of got people to understand that he was serious about this stuff. And so all of these pieces were in place, I think, for them to trust him, for Wildwood Enterprises to come and option the book. And then the stories... Have you read William Goldman's book, Adventures in Screen Trade?
No, I've read a little bit about the weird dysfunctional process
it's
behind
amazing.
Creating the movie.
He almost won't talk about it.
He hates Bernstein.
He talks around it. Yeah, there's a story.
Hates him.
There's a story about Bernstein and Nora Ephron, who were together at the time, writing their own draft.
They wrote a draft, and Redford brought it to Goldman.
Giving it to Redford, yeah.
Yeah, Goldman said it was a gutless betrayal to use Bernstein's draft, and apparently Bernstein's draft was like the most self-serving.
Yeah. The only thing he says the only scene he remembers vividly is a scene where Bernstein sort of flirts with a girl to get her to give over a phone number or some piece of information. In the movie, the scene is just Hoffman basically begging.
Yeah. But there's another scene that made it in that I know never occurred in reality, which is where in Florida, when he's down in Florida and he like fakes out the secretary, gets her to leave the office and goes in, never happened. There's two moments that I think are really interesting for a movie that's all about like ethical journalism, right? And the power and the efficacy of ethical journalism, and the like guessing which thing is the most journalistic and which is the most completely phony is like, it's really illuminating and I think beautiful. You're familiar with the phrase "follow the money" in the movie? Like, there's this huge pivotal... I'm like turning to the camera that isn't there. There's this huge pivotal moment, like in the movie, where Deep Throat is like, "Follow the money," and and it changes everything. It redirects their whole case, their whole inquiry, and slowly things start to unravel. The layers are peeled back. Never fucking happened. It's never mentioned once in Watergate. None of the documentation. Never in the story. Follow the money, as far as this event is concerned historically, is complete bullshit. Right. It never happened. Which I think is hysterical because it's so important to the story of this, the power of ethical journalism, right?
But it's that distillation. That's the thing a screenwriter does, which is figure out what the thing that you aren't saying is, right?
Yeah, how do we get this 8 days of conversation into 3 words?
Yeah.
But it never happened, which I think is like really, really just awesome. And then I think there's one thing that is absolutely the most accurate moment in the film, and I guarantee no one really notices or cares, which is that in the opening scene, when Watergate is being broken into, the security guard who discovers the tape in the movie is played by the actual security guard who discovered the break-in happening when it was occurring, Frank Wills, playing himself. So that moment is actually completely, it's the closest they get to reenacting actual history.
Yeah,
it's just the security guard was the same.
It's kind of amazing. And it's something that, again, no one will notice, and it makes perfect sense. Of course, you want the technical advisor to be. Reenact the thing that he actually did.
Sure, it's also just like I think it's like a little wink, what I mean? Like, here's this, now we're putting in a little bit of actual history, and like you're just seeing this because it's such a brief moment.
Yeah, and it's really just right. Like, it's just a guy jiggling a doorknob.
Yeah, he just looks at a door and he sees some tape on it. He sees some tape over the lock, and he's like, "Huh," and then he calls it in. Yeah. You know what I mean? But that's history right there. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly how it went down, but you know what I mean. They might have changed things a little bit filmically there, but it's him basically living his life on camera again. Yeah. Which I think is really cool.
And the moment that probably the only moment his life intersected with history, with actual import.
I know. And then there it is, captured forever in this really dope movie.
So here's the question that I'm really curious to ask. If you've only seen it recently, how did you perceive it? Did you come to it as this sort of this respected masterpiece? This was this movie that you had to see, or something that you'd always wondered about?
It's my father's favorite film, one of them. So I had resisted any imprecation to witness this film up to that moment. I was like, nah, fuck that. Sorry, Dad, not gonna happen. But he's generally got pretty great taste, except for having watched all of Shannara season 1 on MTV.
Oh, that thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, people like what they like.
Sure. Yeah, okay. But I was on a plane, and I was just like, it's there. I've heard amazing things about it. I'll just check it out. And let's be real. Young Robert Redford is the handsomest, most charismatic, beautiful creature who has ever walked the planet Earth. Like, can you imagine if he just laughed at your joke, how you would feel?
Yeah.
Like the warmth that would fill your body. You'd be levitating at least like 1.5 inches off the ground, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Young Robert Redford, oh my God. Just stud. And then, Dustin Hoffman's at his best in it as well. Jason Robards, obviously, is Ben Bradley, the editor, giving an award-winning performance.
Yeah.
And, it's this... it's interesting because, there is you're observing the best of a toxic environment. And what I mean when I say that is, like, this is the 1970s newsroom. The editors all look like clones of each other.
Yeah.
They're all these just old white guys yelling at each other, and the room is it's basically a story about white men, who are all the power players. All the secretaries and the assistants are women. There's like a black guy in the background of a couple shots. But, this is still like the white man's America, right? This film, and I think like you're like, oh, okay, this is there's a commentary happening here that the film wasn't even aware of because it was immersed in the culture of that time.
Yeah.
Right?
Very
but at the same time, you're looking at people who are very, very good at their jobs. Just because there's this toxic sort of permeance to the ecosystem of that era. It doesn't negate
Nixon's Washington too.
Yeah.
So everyone is cynical. Like everything is worse.
Yeah, it's just acidic.
Yeah, Vietnam's going on. There's just
the
misery
country's
everywhere.
tired. The country's angry, and the country's super sarcastic.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful. It's got that noirish. Like the editors are all these hard bitten, like, just like tough guys. Just spitting acid and fire and brimstone at each other. And it's just great. These hard-boiled, classic newsroom people. You know what I mean? It's just beautiful. It's like, it feels like everything. You grew up reading about like the newspaper. You know?
Oh yeah. I mean, if you want to be.
It makes you want to be a journalist.
Part of it. Yeah.
It makes you want to get out there and like find the truth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Certainly, when I went into the Star building, that was the atmosphere that they're trying to recreate. I think actually some scenes were shot. There were some reshoots were done in Toronto, and
maybe I don't know about that. I know they rebuilt to astonishing degree the Washington Post newsroom on a set in Burbank. They spent like over $200,000. Like they bought all the same desks. They transported trash. They measured out it inch by inch by inch. They replicated out of used phone books to put in the room, like stuff nobody's ever gonna fucking see, but it was exactly that thing. And I know Bradley, the editor, got involved because he was like, the film's gonna get made no matter what. I'm gonna try and like keep it close to the rails. But it's interesting, just to see. Like, one, you still got the deadline, which meant something, right? Because now the deadline is just now. Everything's on this collapsed time frame of, like, it has to be out there immediately. We don't have time to, like, we just have to get the Vine, Twitter, take the Instagram of whatever's happening and post it immediately, and we'll figure it out if it's real or not live on air.
Yeah, all major media is going to be Snapchat based in a year anyway. So why even worry about 500 words or 6,000 words or major exposés that trace the path of something? I mean, you could get away now. I was trying to figure out how you would frame a modern All the President's Men, something set in this present time, as opposed to even Spotlight, which takes place in 2001.
Yeah.
And you couldn't
Ferguson.
You couldn't have the patience for it. Yeah, Ferguson happened live.
You'd have to see, like, this is the new generation of journalists, and it's scary and it's awesome. It's scary because they are not trained.
Yeah.
They are not versed in any sort of the code of ethics of journalism. They're not like, they don't know the process of sourcing. They don't know the process of fact checking. It's all anecdotal, documentarian. I was there, here it is. type stuff, which is it's visceral, it's immediate. There's a level of authenticity to it at times that, is it can't be repudiated. But at the same time, there's not it misses the guideposts and the structure of sort of like classical journalism, which, to a certain extent, it barely exists. Right, it's a husk of its former self, just in terms of how much of it is alive and well in the United States, at least.
Yeah.
It's just like the papers are shrinking. There's not enough time. Stories are getting shorter and shorter, faster and faster. There's not long-term, in-depth investigative reporting in the same way that there used to be.
Yeah, and there is, clearly based on how social media responds when something does happen, there is a demand for it, but no one knows how to monetize it, so it's not being done.
Well, you just need to stop giving away the news for free.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I think there's this thing, the internet was sort of kind of laughed at and wasn't really seen as like, the prior generation, I think, didn't really treat the internet seriously. And we're like, it doesn't really have a relationship to the actual paper or the actual product. Like, the commodification of news is unrelated to the internet. And so they just opened the floodgates, like, sure, you can read the paper online, yeah, whatever. Yeah. And, immediately people were like, oh, the news is free.
Yep.
And, it never should have been that way.
Well, just like everything else on the internet. Right?
Yeah, you can find a way to,
everything is available to people if they want it badly enough.
4chan, go deep web.
Yeah, it's just insane. I mean, we're sitting here surrounded by DVDs and Blu-rays, which are a physical media format that's probably going to go away within, 10 years?
Yeah, shorter than that, I imagine.
But then I'll still have them.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll be okay. It's just, all this history is going to disappear if you can't find it.
Well, there'll be museums.
I should hope so, yeah.
There'll be viewing palaces.
The Museum of the Modern Image, the moving image will just separate into small screening rooms.
Yeah, well, I'm really... there's a really weird relationship, even as an actor who's acts in fictional work. We're paid way less for internet stuff.
Oh, of course, right.
Our rates are much higher if it's broadcast on television, if it's put in a film. But if it's, it's for, say there's a residuals contract, right? Which is it's something I do airs again, right? And if it airs again on TV in prime time, I get a much larger paycheck for that than if it's to air again on Hulu.
Right.
Why?
Yeah.
And that's all because of advertising dollars, right? The ad buyouts for internet are cheaper, theoretically, than they are for primetime TV.
Yeah. I mean, now, 10 years from now.
10 years from now, but already, the massive confluence of viewership is occurring on digital platforms, and everybody knows that's why HBO has an app now. Everybody's getting their app because it's everybody wants a la carte viewing. They don't want to have to tune into a broadcast schedule, but there's a relationship to all information, right? Is going through the internet, and it's just this wild west of deregulated, information streams.
Yeah,
and I think there needs to be. I'm a labor guy. I'm a union guy. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I believe in regulatory practices. I believe in the power of them. People should have to pay for work.
Yeah, I write for a newspaper. Trust me, I'm on your side.
That's why I fucking hate the Huffington Post. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the Huffington Post as a website and as a platform is worth gajillions. It's worth untold millions of dollars. But they pay people nothing. They pay their staff, I'm sure, their editorial staff.
I'm sure the web people get paid.
But they should be ashamed. You know what I mean? I get it. And the hardest thing is on the individual who takes a job there, who offers an article there, because you're like, well, I'm in a position where I can't really say no. And that's the whole reason collective bargaining exists. That's the whole reason that so many labor practices exist and so many labor bodies exist, is because as an individual, you have no leverage in the marketplace. Unless you have sole ownership or authorship over some product or patent that everybody's after, some bit of information that everybody needs.
Right.
And so I just think this freelance, independent contractor, everybody mano a mano, everybody on their own share economy thing is fucking ruinous, and we need to get out of it as soon as possible.
Yeah. Well, I think the end point has to be a return to respecting the idea of work, which is never going to happen in the current mode. I don't know how you shift out of it. I don't know how you get people who, there's an entire generation that's grown up having everything for free in front of them on the internet or available for 99 cents on iTunes, I don't know how you shock them into understanding. I mean, maybe it's turning 25 and realizing they have to get jobs.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's exactly it. I think it's really when you're in high school or in college or whatever, when you're younger, and, you know, the notion of free is your life. It's the sort of foundation of your life in a lot of ways, unless you're growing up in a really working class sort of situation where, you know, the family needs you to work from an early age, and you sort of understand how consuming working for a living and making very little.
Right, and then you're less likely to have the privilege of going to college and being able to get away from it.
Exactly. It's harder to live in that sort of like bubble of like, no, I just want to watch a movie. Give me the movie.
Yeah.
You know? But I think that like, I do think that it's about loud voices when they have an opportunity, calling it out. Because I do think there is this beautiful mob effect that is like really useful right now on the internet. It's terrifying, and I myself am like, oh, I gotta get better about like just like overreacting instantly to everything. You know, like the whole outrage syndrome is like really also, it's just destructive to discourse, it's destructive to nuance, it's destructive to, you know, oppositional dichotomous truths, which are very fucking real and need to be observed and respected. For our society to flourish as an aggregate of heterogeneous sort of peoples. You know what I mean? We're not all a homogenized white bread structure. We don't share the same belief systems. We need to embrace nuance and differentiation, and not just like lynch each other and like come with the pitchforks and torches whenever somebody says something incorrect.
Right. Although
even then, like I just had like a streak of fear because I said the word lynch, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna be torched for just using that word.
Well, everything is loaded now if you want it to be, if you find a way to be angry. And I think that's the weird thing about Twitter lately, is that there are people trolling my mentions or trolling my tweets. From somebody responded to something I said 3 weeks ago and got it and took offense in entirely the wrong context just to be angry, like just to keep just to prolong that. I'm sure that happens to you way more
all the time. Well, I see stuff from like years ago, like those twitchy folks, you know what I mean? Adam Baldwin,
he's a time bomb,
troglodyte, but what a moron. He's just stupid. He's a stupid, like you read what he says, you're like, you're just kind of like not a super bright guy. You know what I mean? And he's angry. He's lost.
Cousin who's said it. You see him once a year, and you're like, "Really? You're still doing that?"
Well, it's like you meet people, and you're like, "Oh, some personal things went down for you," and your way of rationalizing these sort of very personal tragedy that's unfolded for you, or these struggles or these obstacles, you have rationalized them into a societal, systemic conspiracy.
Right. Yeah.
And like that's a really dangerous way to think. You know. My problems are not everyone else's fault sometimes, you know, or just the other's fault, whoever the other might be in that situation. But yeah, to get back to an earlier sort of like thesis, there are interviews, like celebrities get the opportunity to work for Huffington Post all the time, to write pieces, to do interviews. Sure. They do these live web things or stuff like that. But like a platform like that, it's important, I think, to boycott or to say something or to be like, no, absolutely not. I will not use your platform while you don't pay writers.
Right.
Or if you want to have an interview with me, we're going to talk about why you don't pay writers. And that's it, period. But at the same time, the biggest problem is like often you're working on behalf, like say my show airs in January, right? And so there'll be a certain amount of press that, whoever amongst the cast, they're like, you will be the faces for now. They'll send us out, and because you're working for ABC, the studio, the network, and its parent company, Disney.
Right.
Lovely, lovely, friendly Disney. I got no beef. I love you guys, but...
You're doing good work.
But, you have to be respectful of the people signing your checks and understand that, they are spending a lot of money and time to try and promote their product, and they're asking they're not really asking, but they're using you to be the face of it, and... I'm really torn sometimes because I think there's a righteous sort of like there's an obligation of trying to speak to an issue that needs to be spoken about, but at the same time not selfishly detract from the work of your collaborators.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you pull focus as soon as you bring something up that isn't directly related to the project, but at the same time, you're also trusting that the reporter will keep it, will use it. I mean, even in this case, there's so much of this stuff that dovetails back and reaches back to All the President's Men. It's sort of, it's outside.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah.
It's outside the purview of the show, but it's all valid. So I'm definitely keeping it because it's the kind of thing that illuminates a perspective on the film as well as where you're coming from. But when you're talking about an ABC show, which is, as far as I can tell from what I've seen, a sitcom, and something that can be easily understood by a reporter, you're kind of hoping that they'll keep some germ of what it is you want to talk about as well as the thing you're selling.
Yeah, I mean, I think to try and like be responsible here as an interviewee, the connection that I would make these long tangential paragraphs to All the President's Men is the need to understand what is an enormous like a corruption within our society, or a malevolent influence, or a cheating of the system that is adversely affecting a gross number of people, and to speak to power. You know what I mean? It's the ability to stand up and speak to power in an intelligent fashion, and one that demands answers.
Yeah.
And there's this lack of follow-up in our journalistic discourse now that is in the movie that's so beautiful. Like everything they're going, and like the way they just call it, like, hey, it's Bob Woodward from the Washington Post. Like there's no like, I'm gonna like this James O'Keefe motherfucker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who like this perversion of what journalism is. The guy who went after Planned Parenthood, where it's like, I'm gonna create a fraudulent identity and then lie the whole way through it, then re-edit videos, and then claim that I have the right to do so as a journalist with protection under the First Amendment and freedom of the press.
Right.
And it's this understanding, like, watch All the President's Men and understand what the press is. And how it's like, hey, I'm a reporter working for this, can you answer this question?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask it again. I'm going to ask again, well, do you have a comment on this? And we're gonna fact check you, and we're going to show every facet of this thing, so you better make sure you come out right. I'm giving you an opportunity here. But just know I'm coming after this story.
Yeah.
But, you know, but it gives people an opportunity to understand that the fifth press operates in the light.
Yeah.
It's not a thing...
It's designed to illuminate.
Yeah.
That is the very point of the media.
Exactly. And
or was.
Yeah, it was. Right now the media is like, well, what is the distortion? Right? Whenever I watch a news story, I'm like, where is the inherent bias?
Right.
Right? Because depending on what network you're watching, what anchorman you're watching, you're getting this really sort of like... This altered state of news. But, you know, like if you watch Wolf Blitzer, you're getting a conservative guy, you know, centrist conservative more than, he's not as reactionary as evangelical, like he's not evangelizing out there the way some of them do.
But his response to something is always going to be, well, why should I? Like, I'm trying to think of Blitzer's. His thing to me seems to just be bewilderment. Like he'll play that weird Andy Rooney card.
Yeah, like,
why is this happening?
Yeah.
What's going on?
But well, like the way he protester coverage. Where he's like, aren't you worried about the violence in the streets? Like, doesn't it concern you to see this sort of violent, unchecked, sort of like unscrupulous behavior of protesters? And it's like, whoa, that's a very, like that question's answered itself. You know, that's answering a question you didn't even ask.
Yeah, it's confirmation bias.
Yeah.
He's assuming that this is happening, therefore, how do you know, he's going to accuse other people of manipulating it or creating it.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's this thing where you're like, depending on the personality of the person you're experiencing, you're getting a very different story. Mm-hmm. And I think the press is all about how close can we get to objectively what is occurring. And it doesn't fucking matter who bites the bullet. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Democrat, it doesn't matter if it's Republican, it doesn't matter what side looks bad, because it matters what happened.
Right.
And why.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And that's the thing that I was thinking about in relation to All the President's Men. And with Watergate, it would never have been a scandal. It would have been, you know, it's the kind of thing where now in the present day, in the age of Donald Trump saying, oh, I didn't say that, or Clinton saying, you know, we needed a private server because I wanted to keep my personal life private, and just ignoring the truth of anyone in a high enough position of government function will bleed in. Like, you're never going to be able to fully separate those two selves. Here it would simply be, it wasn't Nixon, it was three guys down the line, it was...
Kennedy invented that policy of, like, keep the head separate from the body, like, you know what I mean? Yeah, there's always plausible deniability.
And what's the other? Oh, the bad actors, the bad apple argument.
Yeah,
which was perfected by Bush and Rumsfeld and Ashcroft. God, I sound like a bomb-throwing liberal.
No, but I mean, look, that's what I am. You know what I mean? I'm a huge lefty. Like, you know, that's going to be clear. Talk to me for a second, and I'm like, you can hear me organizing the workers. You know what I mean? But you know, there's a character specifically in All the President's Men that I think is fascinating, and is absent from the political landscape today. That's Sloane. You know, here's a Republican, an honest Republican,
right,
who doesn't believe win at all costs, who is a measured, principled, ideological Republican, which is like, he believes in, you know, whatever the Republicanism of that era was, which is very different than the Republicanism of now. But, you know, had a, you know, smaller, you know, checked government,
right, yeah,
less, you know, lower taxes, but basically it's
social responsibility.
Social responsibility. It's a more moderate, but you know, it's the, you know, the expansion of the private sector, the thing like that. But you know, Nixon did the Clean Water and Air Act. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like there wasn't this absolutism.
Yeah, no, Reagan's still 8 years away. There are still politicians who, I mean, no one can argue that Nixon got into politics for the charm and the charisma. He wanted to be in power, but he also did want to be a head of government. He wanted to affect change, and he wanted to be a shepherd.
He wanted to be a good president. He just wanted to be president.
Yeah.
And he was willing to do anything to become president. I mean, he was a horrible human being.
Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, I mean, like just an awful human being. I don't want to like idolize like Nixon.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably the first, if not maybe Johnson, but he got to be president by sort of cruel fate.
Yeah.
But I think Nixon is the first example of the joke about how, you know, the only people who want to be presidents are sociopaths or narcissists.
Yeah, I mean,
kind of had both going on. But
there's some earlier presidents that you could probably make a case for there too, like mid 19th century.
Sure, people who beat their way.
Yeah.
But in terms of party politics and the way things organized in the 20th century, Nixon was the guy who, you know, running against Kennedy was the thing that defined him as the evil troll. Mm-hmm. But he still, Clean Air and Water Act. He still managed. And he ended
the Vietnam. I mean, to be fair, like
the day he stepped down.
Yeah. You know, it's a complicated sequence of events that leads to Nixon being responsible for the end of Vietnam. You know, Kissinger thwarting the ability of the government to create peace within Johnson's era.
Yeah.
Kissinger, what a scumbag, huh? It's weird because his kid is in comedy TV business.
Really?
He's like a writer he's a creator on The Office. I think he's creating a show for TBS now. So it's just weird because I'm like, I see him around every now and then. I mean, maybe he's a nice guy, but like, you know, his dad is like, you know what I mean?
But there's that handful of political figures who will never fully be prosecuted or brought to bear for the things that they've done. Kissinger.
Pretty much all of them. Like,
Ashcroft,
you know what I mean? There's,
Rumsfeld.
You know, Rumsfeld, Bush, but I mean, you know, Cheney. They're all.
Cheney's like Voldemort. You can't even speak his name.
Oh yeah, but you know, there's every list like Clinton.
Literally,
Clinton's actions in Latin America. The sanctions on Iraq that led to like 1 million children starving to death.
Oh, it's not specifically a Republican thing. This happens.
Every major political leader does things that are horrible, and will not, as long as they are the president of America, it is very likely that they will ever be called to account for those actions. Yeah. Except in books and movies down the road.
Yeah, I mean, that's why Nixon makes such a fantastic villain in All the President's Men. We never see him.
Yeah.
He's experienced entirely through teletypes and TV broadcasts.
And we already know that we hate him.
Yeah.
You know, like, you walk in, you're like, we've hated him for 15, 20 years before the movie was made. Like, you're like, I've hated this guy since 1960.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what would it be like? What would it have been like in 1976 to walk into a theater and know that that's the story? Like, and that's the thing that Goldman talked about. Every aspect of the story is something that people already know. You know the ending, and you know the basic bones of it, because that was a huge, huge story in 1974. You couldn't miss it.
Well, I think it's you know, it's the story about Muskie, right? And this is the weird, because, you know, the phrase to myself, perverting the course of history, you know, kept entering my mind. And like, well, no, you can't pervert the course of history. History just is. You know, history is whatever happens. But he perverted the will of democracy. You know, by sabotaging Democratic presidential candidates, you know, through these surreptitious and covert sort of like operations. Yeah, really, you know, with creep and everything like that.
How can you have a committee called Creep?
I mean, they were literally that, like, they were just like that ballsy. They just they didn't care. They're like, no one's going to get us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They were just that confident.
Well, that's how I feel about James O'Keefe, right? He thinks he's being clever, but the editing is so transparent and the perspective and the bias is so obvious. But yeah, I think that's an arrogance that comes from, for lack of a better term, it's ingrained power, where you've grown up in this universe. Like Nixon was a guy who thought he was a fighter, and he was. Like he struggled from his weird religious upbringing to come into American politics and be his own man. But at the same time, he was a guy with the levers of power available to him all the time. And by the time Watergate happened, it's just like, well, of course you would stop the bad guys who you perceive as the bad guys. Mm-hmm. Of course you would do whatever it takes to keep your position of power. Yeah. Because why wouldn't you? And O'Keefe is the same way. It's like, I'm releasing this and it's journalism because I say it is. And the rest of you are too dumb to know what I'm doing.
Well, and also the 60s was the rise of like, well, you know, and I think it's, and, you know, a lot of them worked in the McCarthy era as like lawyers or like young aides or whatever. Like, you know, they all were sort of like inculcated in this era of like, you can ruin, you know, like you have the ability to end people.
It wasn't just intimidation, it was destruction.
Yeah, so there's this policy of like destruction as consequence. Like if you are the enemy, if you're perceived as the enemy, you are just destroyed. Mm-hmm. You know, and for a while, you know, the label communist was a very effective sort of flag to wave over anyone's head who you were like, well, you need to get rid of them or something like that. Or like, you know, a justification. But over time, you know, that just sort of becomes any opposition.
Right.
Is basically sort of seen, you know, you can, the right thing to do is just destruction. And I think, you know, Lee Atwater, Rove, the young Republicans, the college Republicans or whatever, that come up with the Southern strategy and just like this slow, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's just win. But there's this character, Sloan, in the movie who, you know, is a big source for Woodward and Bernstein going forward. And like, you know, he's really a moral figure. You know what I mean? He wants to be a Republican who does the right thing. And is willing to speak out against, to some degree, was willing, though he recanted later, they got to him. But, you know, was willing to speak out against the people in charge, you know, desperately wanted people to be held account for what he saw as, like, you know, sort of actions treacherous and treasonous to you know, the guiding principles of American democracy, of this democratic republic. And where is that voice now? On the right, who's willing to be like, our party, you know, is better than this.
Yeah, you would think right now, especially with Trump ascendant,
well, and
there would be more.
There's such an opportunity. There's such an opportunity for a person of character, if there were one in the Republican Party, which to be frank with you, I just don't think there is really right now currently.
I don't know that there is even. I was going to say the appeal or attraction, but I don't even think there's a reason for people of conscience to be Republicans now. Or
not by that platform.
Yeah, after the last 16, well, even like since the mid-90s, since Gingrich sort of hijacked the whole principle anyway, I think they've spent all this time alienating anyone with a sense of social or cultural relevance.
Yeah.
Why would you want to work with these people? And then you see the people they bring up as the young hot, like Paul Ryan is the young hotshot, and he looks like a Muppet, but he has nothing to say. And
nobody likes these guys. Like they keep like, you know, Marco Rubio, where you're like, oh, he looks like a guy who could win an election,
except for the giant bat ears. But yes, okay.
Yeah. But like, he just has no capacity for leadership. It just doesn't exist within these people, you know what I mean? You just like, you don't look at them and be like, yeah, okay, I would definitely listen.
Yeah. Well, it's the cynical, I mean, it's beyond cynical. Nixon was cynical. Mm-hmm. Nixon knew that he could use the pulpit of the presidency and stall or distract or dissuade in a way that would get his message out long enough. And at the time, the news cycle was such that you could just simply say something and that the president said, and it would take weeks or months for it to be taken apart.
Yeah.
Because even though the reporter base was stronger, the gears were grinding so much more slowly. Now, all you need to do is have one sentence that you repeat over and over and over again. But we get that sentence through people like, you know, Sarah Palin, which the Republicans pushed forward because they thought Hillary Clinton was going to run for vice president if she didn't get the presidency. So we have a woman too. And the cynical choices are just so weirdly obvious.
Yeah.
Like, they don't know that everything is transparent now, that you can see through all this stuff.
Well, it's the same problem with the Democrats, right? The DNC, and establishment politics in general. I think it's this real, it's a group of people who grew up, in politics 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And their understanding of, like, how visible certain power structures are is very different.
Sure.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, they just don't... They're not aware that, like, young people can, like... can look things up immediately and be like, this is bullshit. Like, this is just so... This is just pandering. Like, it's so pathetically obvious that this is pandering. Right. And it's difficult, and, like, Hillary's a very capable politician. She's a terrible campaigner. I think she's not a person who is most effective on camera. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, she's a person that is definitely, like, she knows her circles, she knows how to work powerful people and how to achieve goals that she wants to, the whole Clinton triangulation thing, whatever, you know what I mean? But, she's...
I don't doubt she'll get things done.
Yeah, it's just she's terrible. She's not good at persuading. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? She doesn't have the easiest time in that sphere. Yeah. Which is not easy for anybody. Yeah. You know, it's very difficult. I met our current president, Barack Obama, very briefly.
Oh, wow.
A few years ago, because I did some stumping for him in 2012. And he is one of the most charismatic people you'll ever meet. And his ability to speak extemporaneously and illuminatingly on anything is just sort of astonishing. Yeah. You're just like, here's a brain that is like, you can just see him careful, like the diction, the preciseness of his lexicon, where you can see him like dancing around the minds, you know what I mean, the landmarks, because everybody's just waiting for those gotcha moments now. Sure, yeah. And you can just see him just like sorting through his words and offering this really sort of like, in some ways, forgotten moderate. He's like the forgotten generation of the moderates, you know what I mean? Yeah. Of just like, well, it's best that we try to meet everybody's needs and just like, do our best to like slowly and incrementally, answer the questions that we all have.
Yeah. There's a clip of him talking to someone after a public appearance. I think it must have happened Monday or Tuesday. I just saw it yesterday.
The gun thing?
The gun thing, where someone says, you're helping Hillary take her guns away, and he just says, I've been in office 8 years, you still have your guns.
You have more guns than ever.
Yeah, and he answers it with stunningly, without anger.
Well, that's the thing about him that I think, like, that was the big lesson. I feel like I have to, like, because I get angry at his lack of anger sometimes. Yeah. And that's why I think Bernie Sanders has such appeal. Is like, you're like, yes, catharsis, we're so frustrated. But, I think, I do believe, however harsh the lesson of obstructionism has been the past 8 years for half of America.
Yeah, at least.
The more we as people can respond softly, but intellectually in a principled and honest fashion, where you can honestly express your view, your vantage, whatever it is, but also understand that debate is a forum for aspirational conflict.
Right. You
know what I mean? And that it's not to win. And I think, it's a great lesson to take away if I'm married. And for anyone who's in a long-term relationship, learning that you should never try to win in any argument is a really useful lesson. Like, it's what you want is peace and happiness in the nation. You know what I mean? Like, that's the win. That's the victory, is disarmament, Yeah. And
it's not mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, exactly. There's a great Dr. Seuss book, where they're each building the weapons race, and it's like, it just leads with them like poised on the precipice of mutual destruction on this fence, and it's like, that's the difficulty with this sort of like polarized national conversation, where we sit so far apart and we're so unwilling to compromise our own views and to be like, well, I know that's not great, but we have to find some sort of consensus. And if I stop thinking about this in terms of victory and start thinking about this in terms of commonality and you know, maybe we can somehow find the ability to govern our nation again. But you know, think about how different when you talk about like the reaction of people watching this film, you're watching it and you're like, my God, Nixon might not have been president.
Yeah.
He might not have won the election. And like, regardless of him getting impeached and resigned, the fact was Ford then became. It wasn't like there's a mulligan and a do-over. You know, we didn't rerun the election and be like, okay, let's just try it again. You know, this time, no bullshit. And no, like, that was for 6.5+ years, for 8 years, there were Republicans managing the state of affairs for the nation. And, you know, there's a real solid argument to be made that might not have occurred without creep, without them rat fucking their way to the Oval Office. And when you watch the film, you're like, God, you know, that's the power of the Fifth Estate. That's the power of journalism, properly funded, motivated, ethical journalism that you can see in a film like All the President's Men. Is that it can course correct, it can divert the flow of history back down what feels like its proper channel.
Yeah,
and
or it could at the time.
It could. It had the ability. You know that. With those factors of like money, there's a certain amount of prestige that the news had back then. Like,
sure.
You know, and I think like it exists to this day and age. I think we still respond to truth in the same fashion as a public.
Yeah, the problem is getting to the point where we all agree on what the truth is.
Yeah, we can't differentiate.
That's
anymore.
what doesn't happen anymore.
And
you were saying about people yelling at each other rather than coming to a compromise. If all you're doing is waiting for the other person to stop talking so you can drop your line that you've been working on, then you're not listening. You're not actually having a conversation. And All the President's Men, and Spotlight too. I mean, because it is the spiritual cousin to it.
Yeah.
Those are films that are about a team of people using every resource available to let everyone know the unequivocal truth. Like an irrefutable fact is that this thing has happened. Yeah. And by the time it comes out, it's so exhaustively researched that it is undeniable, to the point where in All the President's Men, it simply ends as it began, with a teletype that says, it's over.
Yeah, this is what happened.
Yeah.
It's amazing because even they brought down the president.
Yeah.
These two guys and this paper and this story, they brought down a president. You know, I mean, it's like, wow.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Only time that's ever happened. I mean, there's never been another circumstance, and probably has been in other nations, in other times, in other eras, but in American history, this was the moment.
Jaw-dropping. It's a jaw-dropping reminder of like how unbelievably cool great reporters can be.
Yeah. And
like, God, if you know, like if you're like, whew, if I'd been a kid and seeing that movie in the 70s, I've been like, I'm going to journalism school. I'm gonna be a reporter. Like, this is what I'm gonna do. You know what I mean? Like, there's no greater weapon for the cause of good than the truth, and that is what the Fifth Estate is. That is what journalism is. That's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm probably unconsciously quoting either Goldman or Pakula, but maybe it was something I wrote. I don't know, but it was the thing that's always amazed me about this film is that it all boils down to not persisting in asking questions, but knowing which questions to ask. Yeah. And knowing which questions aren't being answered. Mm-hmm. So, which gives you that amazing moment with Hoffman on the phone saying, I'm just going to count.
Yeah, count to 10.
Yeah.
I mean, and the tension of those moments, when you actually see, like, the crazy thing at the end of the movie, there's, you know, the cast list and everything, it's like 15 people.
Yeah.
There were maybe 15 people in that movie total, and it feels like there are thousands.
Yeah, well, that's the use of Washington, right? The use of the locations and getting this sense of scope in the city, and the constant grind.
Such a good movie.
It is, it's fantastic. But that constant grind of TV in the background and radio and people talking about this as it's developing, and all the time, this is the genius of the narrative, because we know it's going to work out. You can put them in front of as many barriers, as much frustration. You can make it as hard as possible, because somewhere in the back of your mind, your brain goes, well, Nixon isn't president anymore, so they'll be okay. Yeah. And the attempts at intimidation and the lack of personal lives, just the fact that their entire world is this story.
Yeah, it's it. It's all they care about. They're obsessed with it. And also just like outside of journalism, it's a reminder of a kind of like you know, the 70s were, you know, in many ages, like, you know, the golden age, right? You know, just like every film was like, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes, 1976, All the President's Men lost Best Picture to Rocky, but it lost it along with Bound for Glory, Taxi Driver, and Network.
I mean,
it was
what an incredible year for movies.
Yeah, that's an all-star lineup.
I mean, any single one of those movies. I mean, Rocky's a great movie.
Rocky's still pretty good.
Rocky is a totally enjoyable movie, but Network, Taxi Driver, and All the President's Men. I haven't seen Bound for Glory.
Bound for Glory is fantastic. It's a Hal Ashby film about Woody Guthrie with Keith Carradine.
I love
just
Woody
reissued
Guthrie.
on Blu-ray.
Check it out.
Yeah,
because I'm a big Woody Guthrie fan.
Really, really good.
I'm so culturally ignorant. I really am. I'm so deficient. I haven't seen so many movies.
But think about all the stuff there is to catch up to. Like, I don't envy that position. I'm lucky enough to have been. This has been my job for for almost 30 years now. I've been watching movies and catching up.
That's so cool, man. What a great job.
It's pretty great sometimes.
But like, it was a $5 million film, grossed 70, I think, 0.6, right? So it made a ton of money after the fact, and so it's this tiny film, tiny budget. I mean, with inflation, you move it up like 15, 20 million now, or whatever it is.
It's a certain amount of prestige for it to begin with. It's not like
it was a Redford Hoffman.
Yeah, it's not like people wouldn't go when it came out. There was never going to be a boycott.
But, the way it's shot, there's almost no close-ups in the entire movie. Outside of some of the scenes with Deep Throat in the parking garage.
Right.
It's almost all... Yeah, it's shadows, but it's almost all in two shots. It's in wide shots. And there's this thing where the camera lingers and lets people live. And, like, people mutter and they talk. And you don't have to catch the tear glinting in the eye. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? There's this thing... And it's not overlit. Like, it's fluorescent, it's pale, it's gross, people look sickly, people don't look great. Yeah. There's the sound of planes and see where people have to yell over the sound of ambient noise. These are things that don't exist in films anymore because they make it harder to edit. They make it harder to convey exactly to a unrelenting degree the exactitude of a moment.
Right.
The moment. You know what I mean? It's a movie that's like, we trust the audience. We trust how smart the audience is. We're gonna move fast. We're gonna move conversationally. We're gonna show things in it. We're gonna show the environment and not just the faces.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
By contrast, in terms of storytelling, Spotlight has a little more of the personal lives of the reporters, but not very much. And McCarthy, when he came through last year to TIFF, we talked about it a little, and he said he was in the screenwriting phase. He was trying to figure out how much you need to know about people, and he figured that Sasha's story, the Rachel McAdams character, her relationship with her grandmother, which is all true, who was not only a practicing Catholic but a committed Catholic who was slowly having her foundation shaken by realizing she couldn't trust the church, if not her faith. That was the personal angle, and the other stuff with Ruffalo's marriage being in a shambles, and that just had to be incidental. Mm-hmm. And his touchstone was All the President's Men because the investigation has to drive everything. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to see something...
The story is everything.
Yeah, and if you're going to see some personal aspect of the characters, it has to be in relationship to the story, because if you're a reporter and you're chasing something like this, that's your world. Mm-hmm. So even when you're not on the story, you're going to be thinking about the story, so you have to see how it infects them. Yeah,
the obsession of the cost, right? The personal cost of being a great reporter. Mm-hmm. Is that it destroys everything else in your life. Like you can't be a successful family person, and you can't manage relationships, and you're not reliable, and you're not there, and so much of your life is obsession. And it has to be, because no one is helping you, and you have to deliver this thing. But yeah, it's difficult to know, like, because it does feel ancillary to that kind of movie. Like, I don't need to hang out in the living room of, like, I don't need to see a date happen. Like, I want the story. Yeah. As the audience, like, we are also eager to know the truth. Like, we should feel that same propulsion through it. It's interesting, too, because, like, there's a natural sort of paranoia, right, to the press, mm-hmm. right? Because it's like you're always like on the verge of uncovering the conspiracy.
Yeah,
right.
Well, you spend all your time not trusting people, even people you like, because there is always a motivation. Who benefits? Mm-hmm. Why are you telling me the thing you're telling me now? Yeah. Why aren't you telling me the thing you'll tell me tomorrow?
Yeah, there's always a cover up, and it's It's interesting too because I've been reading a lot of Pynchon recently. Like I'm very recently sort of been introduced to Thomas Pynchon.
Okay.
And I greatly enjoy his work. I think it's just masterful and absurdist and really sad and super funny, but paranoid, like utterly paranoid. And there is the 70s in particular, I think, was an era of like paranoid, like paranoia was infecting the country. Like you look at the books being authored, you look at the movies being made, like The Conversation,
sure.
You know, even Pakula,
View,
yeah, the Parallax View, Clue. You know, there's all these different, Serpico, you know, there's this whole, like, everything is, like, there's a layer of truth, man, out there, you know, right. Apocalypse Now is, you know, like, you're looking at all this sort of, like, generation where this 10 or 12 year, 13 year span where, like, everything is, like, it's not what you've been told, man, yeah. You know,
which recurs now because of, you know, post 9/11 paranoia is different, but I'm thinking of something like The Matrix where suddenly there had to be a different reason. It couldn't be humans doing it to you. It had to be some larger thing. The 70s, the amorphous conspiracy that's just a bunch of people in suits that you can't fully understand is somehow more terrifying because it's still people doing it.
Yeah, well, and that's there, right? And now I think, like, you know, what is the fabric of our storytelling now? Like, what are the conceits? What are the themes, right? Like, you look at it
Spider-Man.
Versus Spider-Man, just superhero movies, right? In general, like, that's the majority of films being made. There's, like, to a clear, an irrevocable, like, the scales have been tipped. You know what I mean? Like, that's where we are now, right? And, like, what does that convey about us versus, like, you know, all the President's Men, where it's like two guys who just worked real hard, were able to achieve something, you know, with the help of a lot of other people.
Sure, yeah.
And the support of an institution, you know, a prestigious institution, not the New York Times, but, you know, the Washington Post is still great.
Yeah.
You know, I just love that because I love in the movie how they, like, snipe back and forth about how the fuck the New York Times is beating them to this story, and how much it pisses them off. But now it's a magical everything is this magical reality, and humans almost don't exist in movies anymore except as props for magical creatures. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's sort of everything's given over to adolescent power fantasies about the chosen one.
Yeah, and like, I think that's really dangerous. Maybe that's that feels hyperbolic, but I do think there's something that there is a risk in that sort of mythology.
Yeah. Well, we won't know the damage for another 15 years. Like, we need to see the kids that grow up on these movies.
Well, like, look at the, you know, like, even if you look at, like, kung fu films, right? Even though to a certain extent that's their superhero culture, right?
Sure. Yeah.
The masters. Like, the way they got there was lifelong discipline and exertion and practice and a life of slow, steady improvement. You know, where you just work and work and work and work. And those people who work harder become something else.
Right.
Whereas in our culture, you get bit by a spider, you get bombarded by gamma rays.
Well, it's Neo, right? You can download the information into your brain and you know kung fu.
You press a button, you take a pill, a cosmic accident occurs, or you're a child of prophecy. Right. But basically, it's thrust upon you. It's a gift from the universe.
Right.
And then you just get to you're an elite figure of greatness, and I think, like,
anointed ones.
Yeah, anointed ones, and I think you see that in a smaller scale in our, like, obsession with acquiring fame as the end result and the means to it. Like, to be famous, you must be famous. To do something fame-worthy.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, just be noticed. You don't have to do anything. It's not like I really want to invent this cool thing, and, you know, like, by this through the merit of this invention, maybe, you know, my name will become a thing. You know, like, I'm Edison.
Right.
You know what I mean? It does feel now. It's like, well, I just need to get on camera and just say something controversial.
Right.
And that's it.
Well, but then now there's an entire industry built around that, because if you do have your moment, then you can be on Dancing with the Stars, or you can be, you know, they're still doing.
We can talk about the integrity of reality within reality TV. Right? You want to talk about that in relation to All the President's Men, where there's this focus on, once again, exposing what is the underlying objective truth of an event. And reality TV is like, it's basically just scripted television that gets by pretending it's not scripted.
Yeah, I've been calling it fan fiction for the last 10 years.
It's fucking horrible. Like, it's the worst. Like, if it was presented to you as like, hey, I've written a show and I've hired some actors, take a look at it, tell me what you think, you'd be like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
This is
the production values are terrible.
Shameful. The lighting's awful.
People are monsters.
These people can't act at all. You know, it's so clear that they're reading lines of dialogue that are terribly written and so formulaic, and like you just like this redundant storytelling mechanism in place in every episode of like, what's that? It would be great to do this thing, but it would be terrible if this thing happened. Oh my god, this terrible thing happened. Fight, fight, fight. We resolved it.
Yeah.
You know, and like everything we're being fed these days is a distortion that is masquerading as truth.
Yeah.
Which I think is weird to me.
It brings it back to Trump becoming president because of a reality show. Like, because he's been performing for 40 years. This guy's been doing this thing.
Who do we hold to account? You know, who do we hold to? NBC, Universal? Do we say, like, you put this guy on television. Right. You created a platform for him. You made him seem authoritative. You made him seem like he knew what he was doing. You made him seem powerful. And you surrounded him with supplicants. Like, the whole show creates this fantasy, this power fantasy of Donald Trump's hilarious, clownish magnetism. You know, but like...
And that he's always right.
That he's always right. He's unimpeachable. You know, he has this unimpeachable power that it sets up that this is his life, this is who he is, and the world operates according to these principles. You know, that he's tuned into some sort of like higher understanding of how economy works, of how business works, how the marketplace works. And like, is there a response? Like, Network, man, fucking Network is like, you know, another fantastic moment in filmmaking that like everyone should be required to watch All the President's Men in Network right now. Because, you know, and Ned Beatty is the connecting tie between both. God, he was like in everything.
Yeah,
in the
Quantum
70s.
Beatty. He was everywhere and everyone.
Oh yeah, he's so good. He's such a good actor. He's brilliant in Network, and he's brilliant as little bit as the Florida Attorney General. I think, or is it Attorney General, not a district attorney or something like that.
I think he's a DA.
Yeah, in Dade County. Who is it better? Do we need to hold entertainment? To what standard of journalistic integrity do we hold our entertainment? You know, because I'm a fiction writer. I act in fiction.
Yeah.
I believe in fiction. I believe in the essential vitality of fiction, and like how awesome and transcendent, you know, moments of imagination can be. We have to get back to being able to separate something that is presenting itself as truthful as actually being truthful. And I think, like, you know, if you care enough to like watch All the President's Men and sort of investigate, you know, its potential legacy, or its like words, you know, thoughts for us to sort of take away from it, is like the necessity and the power of shining a light into a dark place and showing people what's actually there.
Yeah.
And for people to know that's what's happening. And I think that we just don't... I don't think that we have it. I don't think we have that in our society at this time. Yeah. I don't think... One, we've eroded the public's trust, the public's faith in newspapers, in news channels, cable news being the worst offender.
Right. Well, the media has succeeded in discrediting itself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because Fox going after MSNBC or CNN, then CNN disproving those claims just validates everybody's arguments. So there's this psychology now that we're discovering, where if you present someone with disapproval of their beliefs, it just makes them double down.
Oh, yeah,
because, well, obviously you're telling me that because you don't want me to believe this.
Well, have you ever told someone they're wrong about something?
Yeah, that happens.
You know what I mean? Like, it's the same dynamic, just played out on a bigger scale. Like, people get defensive. Like, this sort of, like, attack. This very personal sort of, like, really... It's one thing to discredit someone who deserves to be discredited. You know what I mean? A story that is just false.
Yeah, calling it a lie is different from pointing someone towards new evidence that may contradict the belief system.
Here is why this is true. You know, there's this, like, they constantly show, like, you know, people run these polls of, like, how true is Fox News or how true is CNN and, like, the percentage of facts or whatever like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting, and I used to, like, be like, that's illuminating. But that's less important than what facts. And, like, we need to be less interested in, like, bright, shiny numbers that point to a broad topic of interest, and we have to get back to details and facts and, like, time. Like, we have to slow certain things down. And even as I say it, I'm like, well, that's never going to happen. Yeah. We're never going to decelerate. But what we need to do is we need to find a space. We need to get people on television and producers behind the scenes who are going to put really, really thoughtful, principled people on who do not care who is right as much as what is right.
Yeah. We're seeing it now oddly enough, with comedy. Like, John Oliver and Sam Bee are doing it.
The closest things.
They're doing long-form journalism for television, and in that, you know, John Oliver will devote 15 or 17 minutes to something, and Bee will do a segment or two on something, or a couple of segments over a couple of episodes. But again, the people, I worry that the only people watching them are people like me who are already on their side, right?
Yeah. Who are we convincing?
Yeah.
And I think that's because it's like you have to get non-niche news people and news networks, and it's tough because, like, I do think, like, the younger generation, you know, the next generation of people who are going to be eventually taking over these positions, you know, becoming the next room of editors.
Assuming we still have the institutions by the time they're old enough.
Whatever, like, Yahoo News, you know. That was a poor choice. That ain't going to be around.
That'll be gone.
Yeah, that'll be gone by Wednesday.
The NBC, Universal, Comcast, Microsoft milkshake machinery that we haven't discovered yet. Uber franchise.
Newsber. Uber News.
Uber.
But just, like, those people who are running whatever institutions arise to you know, hold the megaphone. Like, they have to... There has to be some sort of mandate, I think, that comes from them, that we're going to try harder, and we're going to stay calm. We can be indignant and we can be outraged, but that the volume of our discourse shouldn't change.
Yeah.
That outrage is not a thing that requires volume. I think that's a lesson it takes a while to learn as an adult too.
Oh yeah.
Like, yelling doesn't make you more right, though it feels great, and sometimes it's necessary that someone yells. But this is the thing, and I think, like, where we get... I'm sure you agree, you know, because it's not a new idea, but, you know, how we get better as a society is, like, as people, is, like, to take the full responsibility for our actions, you know, when that unfortunate opportunity arises, when you have to.
I mean, I would like to believe
it's so easy to take credit. It's so hard to take responsibility.
Yeah. I'd like to believe that the situation ever somehow arose that I would be... in my head, I'm like, well, what could I possibly do? But I would still want to be responsible because that's what you're supposed to do, and I know that
it's the right thing.
Yeah,
you know, it's in minor ways in our personal lives, right? Our personal interactions, when, like, you know, we can't make a thing or we do something we shouldn't have done, and, like, owning up to that when the time comes. You know, that's, like, we have to practice that. We have to get better at that as people. But, you know, I yearn to see, like, a real, just great journalism. Like, after watching All the President's Men, it makes you so hungry. Same with Spotlight, where you're like, this is so important. I mean, the worst thing about Spotlight is knowing that Nixon didn't fall.
Right.
When you watch Spotlight, you're not watching the same story. You're like, yeah, the story came out. Money was paid.
The church is still the church.
The church is still the church, and they still covered up who knows the full extent of it.
Yeah. No,
You
it's
know
still
what I
going
mean?
on. I mean, you keep hearing about it. I think the good thing about Spotlight is that you're now, having seen it, you're more aware of the way things work and the machinations that are possible. So I think, it's a teaching tool rather than a historical recounting. It's both. But All the President's Men serves as this amazing lesson of what was done and how it was done and what was the result. And Spotlight is sort of the first step in that story, for that story.
I think Lawrence Wright is a guy that I feel like, is someone who's carrying on that tradition in a real way in a lot of ways. Like his book, The Looming Tower, on sort of the
Path to 9/11,
the whys and wherefores of the jihadist movement, of the fundamentalists, the return of the fundamentalists in Islam, is just, it's painstaking and it's super interesting, and it feels like it has a lot of journalistic integrity.
Oh yeah.
Like to a certain extent, you're taking people on their, at their word. Like, yeah, I mean, this sounds smart. It sounds sourced. I see a lot of annotations here, and you seem like a pretty decent dude.
Yeah.
So
it feels like he's done everything possible to make sure that every page of it is as
authentic,
close to real, not just, convincing, but real. And he does it in the Scientology book.
Yeah, exactly. Going Clear, his work on a few different subjects. He's a really painstakingly thorough guy, and so like I'm really appreciative of his voice out there. Unfortunately, because of the kind of, it's just, it takes a long time to present those stories, and because of how few people there are now, we just rarely get them.
Yeah.
So I've, if anybody's listening, and you want to be a great journalist, please do it. Like if you're a young person, go out there. Don't let anybody stop you. Pursue the truth at all costs.
Yeah. And if you need to know how to start and you're wondering how it goes, watch All the President's Men.
Yeah, watch All the President's Men and fall in love with a young Robert Redford, just like I did.
My thanks to Lucas Neff, whose new series Downward Dog will premiere on ABC in early 2017. You can watch his new thriller Fear Incorporated on iTunes right now, and it shouldn't be long before I Love You Both is also available on VOD. You can find Lucas on Twitter at RealLucasNeff, all one word, 2 L's, and you can find All the President's Men on DVD and Blu-ray from Warner Home Entertainment. It's also for sale and rental on iTunes and Google Play. It's one of the best American movies of the 70s and a genuinely thrilling procedural. Come to the Revue Cinema this Thursday, November 3rd, where I'll be introducing a screening with none other than Brendan Canning of Broken Social Scene. It's his favorite movie, and they've asked me to host, and absolutely goddamn right, I'll be there. The show starts at 6:45 p.m. Come say hi. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes, that would be very kind of you. This week's call sign is Garage Freak. Thanks for listening.